Hello, my name is Oscar Garcia. War just recently broke out in Vietnam, called the Vietnam War. Also known as the Second Indochina War, and known in Vietnam as the Resistance War against America, or simply the American War, was a war that occurred in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia from 1 November 1955 to the fall of Saigon on 30th April 1975. It was the second of the Indochina Wars and was officially fought between North Vietnam and the government of South Vietnam. The North Vietnamese army was supported by the Soviet Union, China, and other communist allies, and the South Vietnamese army was supported by the United States, South Korea, Australia, Thailand, and other anti-communist allies. The war is therefore considered a Cold War era proxy war. The Viet Cong, also known as the Nation Liberation Front, or L and NLF, a South Vietnamese communist common front aided by the North, fought a guerrilla war against anti-communist forces in the region, while the People's Army of Vietnam, also known as the North Vietnamese Army, engaged in more conventional warfare, at times committing large units to battle. As the war continued, the military actions of the Viet Cong decreased as the role and engagement in the NVA grew. U.S. and South Vietnamese forces relied on air superiority and overwhelming firepower to conduct search and destroy operations. Involving ground forces, artillery, and airstrikes in the courses of the war, the U.S. conducted a large-scale strategic bombing campaign against North Vietnam. The North Vietnamese government and the Viet Cong were fighting to reunify Vietnam. They viewed the conflict as the colonial war and a continuation of the First Indochina War against forces from France and later on the United States. The U.S. government viewed its involvement in the war as the way to prevent communist takeover of South Vietnam. This was part of the domino theory of a wider containment policy with the state aim of stopping the spread of communism worldwide. Beginning in 1950, American military advisors arrived in what was then the French Indochina. U.S. involvement escalated in the early 1960s, with troops levels tripling in 1961 and again in 1962. U.S. involvement escalated further following the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident, in which a U.S. destroyer clashed with North Vietnamese fast attack craft, which was followed by the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave the U.S. President authorization to increase U.S. military presence. Regular U.S. combat units were deployed beginning in 1965. Operations crossed international borders, bordering areas of Laos and Cambodia were heavily bombed by U.S. forces as American involvement in the war peaked in 1968. The same year that the communist side launched the Tet Offensive, the Tet Offensive failed in its goal of overthrowing the South Vietnamese government, but became the turning point in the war as it persuaded a large segment of the U.S. population that its government claims of progress toward winning the war were illusionary, despite many years of massive U.S. military aid to South Vietnam. Where did these events take place? Vietnam, South Vietnam, Cambodia, North Vietnam, Laos. And then the Vietnam War started November 1955, 30th April 1975. Now we pass it on to Chris.
Thanks, Austin. Now on to me. Why did the Vietnam War start? The causes of the Vietnam War were derived from the symptoms, components, and consequences of the Cold War. The causes of the Vietnam War revolve around the simple belief held by America that communism was threatening to expand all over Southeast Asia. Neither the Soviet Union nor the United States could risk an all-out war against each other, such as the nuclear military might of both. However, when it suited both, they had clients states that could carry on the fight for them. In Vietnam, the Americans both actually fought. Therefore, in the Cold War game, the USSR could not. However, to support the communist cause, the Soviet Union armed its fellow communist states, China, who would in turn arm and equip the North Vietnamese who fought the Americans. Before World War II, Vietnam had been part of the French Empire. During the war, the country had been overrun by the Japanese. When the Japanese retreated, the people of Vietnam took the opportunity to establish their own government led by Ho Chi Minh. However, after the end of the war, the Allies gave the South Vietnam to the French, while the North was left in the hands of the non-communist Chinese. The nationalist Chinese treated the North Vietnamese very badly in support for Ho Chi Minh group. He had been removed from power at the end of the war. The Chinese pulled out of North Vietnam in 1946, and the party of Ho Chi Minh took over. The Viet Minh. In October 1946, the French announced their intention of reclaiming the North, which meant that the Viet Minh would have to fight for it. The war started in November 1946 when the French bombarded the port of Haiphong and killed 6,000 people. The French tried to win over the people of the North by offering them independence. However, the people would not be allowed to do anything about French permission. A new leader of the country was appointed called Bao Dai. The Russians and Eastern Europe refused to recognize his rule. They claimed that Ho Chi Minh was the real ruler of Vietnam. The French had got themselves into a difficult military position. Despite huge American help, the French could not cope with the Viet Minh's guerrilla attacks. The Viet Minh were by now receiving help from the communist China. Mao Zedong had taken power of China in 1949. The fact that two opposing teams had developed was classic Cold War history. The country was meant to be ruled by Bao Dai, who was supported by the West. Ho Chi Minh was supported by the Russians, Chinese, and Eastern Europe, all communists.
Thank you, Briss. Now on to me. How did both sides react? They both reacted with aggression. The most immediate effect of the Vietnam War was its staggering death toll. The war killed an estimated 2 million Vietnamese civilians, 1.1 million North Vietnamese troops, and 200,000 South Vietnamese troops, and another 58,000 U.S. troops. Those wounded in combat numbered tens of thousands more. The massive U.S. bombings of both North and South Vietnam left the country in ruins, and the U.S. Army's use of herbicides such as Agent Orange not only devastated Vietnam's natural environment but also caused widespread health problems that have persisted for decades. The effects of Agent Orange on the environment. 5 million acres of land defoliated and 500,000 acres of rice defoliated.
Oh, thank you, Alfonso. Now on to me. Positive and negative effects of the Vietnam War. Positive. In the aftermath of the Vietnam War, in our opinion, the only group of people who had a positive outcome was the Vietnamese Americans and other Vietnamese communities in the free world. After the fall of the Saigon in April 1975, the United States extended a generous hand, accepting thousands of Vietnamese refugees as citizens of the great nation. This latter group accounted for over 300,000 Vietnamese and also is called the Humanitarian Operation, or the HO. In 1988, the President Ronald Reagan personally signed a decree allowing entry into America to all Vietnamese military and civilian members at all levels, sent to concentration camps and communist regime after the fall of South Vietnam. depended on the former ranks and contributions. Their prison terms ranged from a few months to 15 years. Negative. The economic and life loss it caused. The U.S. military had used 7 million tons of bombs on Vietnam. More than all bombs dropped on Europe and Japan during World War II. The ultimate human cost of the Vietnam War was staggering from all sides. An estimated 2 million Vietnamese civilians, 1.1 million North Vietnamese soldiers, 200,000 South Vietnamese soldiers, and 58,000 U.S. soldiers were killed. Also, the economic downfall it brought. The U.S. government spent around $350 billion to $900 billion on the Vietnam War, including the very benefits, interest, which left a heavy burden on its economy.